Putting in days and weeks of effort into GMAT prep is a waste of time if your efforts are not leading to progress in the right direction. You can course correct your prep and maximize your GMAT score by tracking your progress properly. Do these things wrong, and you put yourself at the risk of wasting effort, wasting resources, and burning out emotionally. In 15 minutes, I will demonstrate examples of activities that you must do and list activities you must not do as you track your progress during your GMAT prep. Today is day 17 of my GMAT prep. On day 10 of my GMAT prep, I had taken the official GMAT Focus Edition Practice Exam 1 for the first time. My section-wise performance in terms of percentile scores on that day were as follows. I scored in the 81st percentile on the quant section, 96th percentile on the verbal section, and the 20th percentile on the data insight section. My overall score was under 600, which obviously is nowhere close to being the 99th percentile score that I would like to score on the GMAT Focus Edition as well. As I had described in detail in that video, I had made several small errors that led to my score being as bad as it was. Specifically, on the quant section, I had spent way too much time on some early questions, as a result of which I ran out of time towards the end of that section. Thankfully, I made sure to mark answers on all questions in the quant section, even if I was unable to get to solve those questions. As a result, I did not get penalized heavily for that. In contrast, on the data insights section also, I ran out of time. But in addition to that, I made the mistake of not marking answers to all the questions, even if I had not been able to get time to solve them. As a result, the GMAT scoring algorithm imposed a heavy penalty on my data insights score. And I would like to take refuge in the fact that that is the primary reason why my score dropped to the 20th percentile. It might turn out that I'm really horrible at the data insights section and I deserve a 20th percentile score, but we will have to wait for us to arrive at that judgment. Since taking that last practice exam, I have learned a few lessons, obviously, and I have also invested time into preparing for the quant section of the GMAT. Thanks to my practice sessions over the last few days, I'm feeling relatively confident in my ability to do well on the quant section, at least as far as accuracy is concerned. I have also had some learnings on how I can maintain a healthy problem-solving velocity on the quant section. So I'm going to try to apply those learnings today on the practice exam, and I'm hoping to see a better outcome on the quant section than I did on the last practice exam. On the data insight section, I have had zero opportunity to invest any additional hours of prep since I took the last practice exam. This is a conscious choice because I wanted to focus on the quant section first in the course of my GMAT preparation. I described my reasoning for doing that when I was creating my study plan. That said, I will still try to avoid the mistake I made on the data insight section on the last practice exam, and hopefully that will lead to a slightly improved score. I like to believe that this will also give me a more reasonable estimate of where I stand on the data insight section with minimal prep. I fully anticipate to run out of time on the data insight section. This would be in line with my experience with this section over the last few study sessions, where I attempted some questions from this section and tracked my performance. Finally, coming to the verbal section, I have also had zero time to invest any effort into improving my performance on that section. However, since I did relatively well on the verbal section in the last practice exam, I'm hoping that I will not see a major degradation in performance there. That will at least make my job easier as far as completing my preparation for the GMAT Focus Edition is concerned. For a start, I'm just going to spend some time warming up on the quant section by finishing up one pending task from my last few study sessions. Specifically, I just want to read through the solutions of questions that I answered correctly from the GMAT official guide on days 14, 15, and 16 of my GMAT preparation. In the interest of time, I had deprioritized this task on those days because I kept running out of time in my study sessions between trying to finish up what I needed to do for the GMAT and shooting the spoken content that you see in these videos. After I'm done with that, I will jump straight into the practice exam and I will report back with my performance metrics when I'm done. So let's get going. Alright, so at this time, I've spent about 60 minutes just reading through the solutions of questions I had attempted as part of practice sets 4, 5, and 6 on days 14 and 15 of my GMAT prep. As I have stated in my previous videos, I only do this exercise with questions that I had answered correctly either on the first go or on the second go during my practice session. Together, practice sets 4, 5, and 6 that I'm referring to consisted of questions 4, 5, 6, 14, 15, 16, 24, 25, 26, and so on from the GMAT official guide 2023-24. I want to call out a few quick learnings from this exercise. Talking first about problem set 6, which I had attempted on day 15 of my prep. I had mentioned on that day that I had to attempt question 216 several times to get it right. Looking back and analyzing my notes, I realized that I had made an algebraic error 2 times in a row, and that is why I was struggling with this problem so much. Let's just focus on the areas that I'm pointing at in my notes. So for example, I had 1.25 multiplied by 1 minus p multiplied by t. And when I expanded this in the next row, I made it 1.25 minus 1.25 pt. That is obviously wrong because the first part of this expression should have been 1.25t. If I had only done that right, I would have been able to answer this question right on the first go. That said, this is an interesting learning. Going forward, I will try to be be a little bit more diligent whenever I run into elaborate algebraic expressions. Then coming to question 176, this is just one case where I was able to answer the question right on the first attempt. However, as I looked at the solution recommended by the official guide, I think that the solution they are recommending is a little bit more elegant. So I've made a mental note of that approach and I will try to retain it just in case it becomes useful at some point of time in the future. Then with question 156 and question number 56, I just made it a point to revisit the formula for standard deviation. It has been a while since I had to calculate standard deviation manually. I usually just use Microsoft Excel if I am doing something for work. As a result, I was a little rusty on the formula and I revisited it just so I can remember what it is and I'm able to use it if I encounter standard deviation on a problem somewhere. Now, I did encounter questions where substitution seems to be the only approach to solve it. So for example, with question number 26, it looks like substitution is the only way you can get to a final answer on this question. I have said in my previous videos that my recommendation is to always think of substitution as your last resort to solve any GMAT problem. I continue to stick with that statement. So when I encounter a question like question number 26, I will still start by thinking of approaches to solve this problem without using substitution. Only when I am unable to identify an approach like that will I resort to substitution. In my opinion, making substitution your go-to approach to solve GMAT problems is very dangerous. In fact, anybody that tells you to always start solving GMAT problems by using substitution is wasting your time. You should cut your ties with them and run for your life. Then coming to problem set 5, let's talk about question number 115. On this one, I noticed that the GMAT seems to have an elegant solution. However, this was an approximation question and I have burnt my hands with questions like this earlier. I find it hard to judge when the GMAT expects you to approximate a calculation and when it doesn't. So as a simplifier, I prefer to stick to detail and calculate it till a point where the approximation doesn't actually lose out on any detail. So for example, in this case, you are expected to calculate root of 48, which you can approximate as root of 49. However, depending on the answer options you are given, the strategy of simplifying it as root of 49 may or may not work out. Specifically, I want to call out question number 144, where I had done something like that and burnt my hand. So in this case, I had to calculate 0.19 divided by 0.021. I approximated the numerator as 0.2 and ended up with the wrong answer. That is also a good transition point to talk about problem set 4. Here, the only question worth discussing for now is problem number 34. On this problem, the issue that I ran into is just writing my notes in a manner that confused me a little while I was solving through the problem. Specifically, the way I wrote the letters M and W were confusing. While solving through the problem, I mixed the two up and hence couldn't arrive at a clear solution in one go. The same thing has happened to me a couple of times with the letter O, where I have confused it for 0. These are again minor points, but I will try and fix these things going forward. So that is it for this part of the study session today. Now I am going to jump straight into the practice exam for the next 2.5 hours. I am aware that I haven't finished reading through the solutions of questions in problem set 7 and 8, which I attempted on day 15 and 16 of my prep. I will circle back to them at a later point. For now, let's get into the practice exam. Alright, so that was another 2.5 hours or so during which I gave the official GMAT Focus Edition Practice Exam number 2. Before I show you my scores and speak about how I'm interpreting these numbers, I actually want to talk through quickly about how I felt as I went through solving questions on each section today. The order in which I attempted these sections today was quant, data insights, and verbal. My reasoning behind picking this sequence is the same as what I had done with Practice Exam 1. So if you're interested in understanding my reasoning, I recommend having a look at that video. That said, let's talk first about the quant section. If I first talk about what went well, I think I did a good job at following all the accuracy boosting and velocity boosting principles I had identified for this section. As a demonstration, I will quickly turn through the pages of my scratch notes from the quant section. One of the things to observe is how organized I was with my notes throughout this section. So you're looking at question 1 here, question 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6 and 7, 8 and 9, 10, 11 and 12, 13 to 15, 16 and 17, 18, 19, and then 20, 21. There are of course a couple of places where things went a little haywire. For example, in question 2, where you can see I started to get a little scattered, but that is an exception. One surprise for me in the middle of this section was actually running out of ink. So if you look at my notes from question 11, you can see that I was beginning to run out of ink right around here. So I switched to using a different pen, which I realized was too thick, as you can see with question 12 here. As a result, I switched again to a third pen, which is what I used for the rest of the practice exam. For context, I have been using a wet erase marker to write on pages for my practice sets as well as for the practice exam I just took. One of the obvious challenges with most wet erase markers is that you will not be able to tell how much ink there is left. Ideally, you do not want to deal with a problem like this in the middle of your GMAT exam. But this may not be entirely in your control, irrespective of whether you take the exam at home or at a test center. Things can go wrong. Stay calm, have a backup plan if possible, and proceed from there. Let's talk about the data insights section next. Here are the things that went well. In the middle of the section, I realized that I should be using the calculator, and it did help me arrive at answers to certain questions faster. I had read in the instructions that the interface does give you the option of using a calculator, but I had not made use of that the last time I took a practice exam. Obviously, I am not very well acquainted with this section of the GMAT Focus Edition yet, so I won't be surprised if I discover additional features that help me accelerate and improve my performance on this section. Probably the most important thing that went well with this section today is that unlike what I had done with Practice Exam 1, I remembered to mark answers to all questions on the section before the timer was up. So thankfully, I did not get penalized for not responding to all questions on the section. That's also a good segue into talking about what did not go well. Unfortunately, on this section, I was able to answer only 17 questions properly within the given 45 minutes. I did get to question number 18 with maybe 1.5 to 2.5 minutes left on the section, but then I realized that I would not be able to complete the question within that time frame and was risking not marking answers on all the questions. So I took a pause, marked answers to questions 18, 19, and 20, and then I returned to question 18 from the review screen to finish answering it. We know that the GMAT Focus Edition requires you to answer 20 questions within a span of 45 minutes on the data insight section. If we do some quick math, that comes down to about 2.25 minutes per question. Given that I was unable to answer 3 questions on this section today, I would have required anywhere between 6 to 7 minutes to finish all of the questions. That's anywhere between 10 to 20% more time than is actually allocated for this section. So once again, it is clear to me that velocity is one area that I definitely need to work on as far as the data insight section is concerned. I will obviously also need to work on accuracy, but that will depend on what my outcomes look like from the test today. Finally, let's talk about the verbal section. Here, the only thing good I think is that I marked answers to all the questions today. So once again, I did not get penalized for leaving some questions unanswered. However, I don't think I did very well on this section because I know that there were a couple of questions where I was struggling a lot. Specifically, you can see how with questions 10, 17, and 18, I put star marks on those questions. That to me just indicates that I'm not sure about the answers I selected against these. Particularly with questions 17 and 18, I remember I just couldn't wrap my head around what the question was asking me to do. I was also running out of time at that point, so I just marked arbitrary options on these questions and then moved on to the remaining questions on the section. The other big red flag for this section today is that I did not write down enough. So as you can see, all of the scratch work I did for the verbal section was basically just one page. You can see question number 1 here and question number 22 here. So all of it was done on this page alone. Doing less scratch work is not necessarily a good sign because it can indicate that you did not track your answer options well or you did not put in enough thought into each of the questions that you solved. To the extent I know myself, I know that my accuracy drops the moment I start getting lazy like this. This is something that I will continue to watch out for as I get into verbal prep in a couple of weeks from now. Alright, so let's look at my final scores. As you can see, I did pretty well on the quantitative reasoning section. I am on the 100th percentile there and my scaled score is 90 on 90. As a quick reference, if I go back to my notes from day 1 of my preparation, as you can see here, all the 3 sections on the GMAT are scored between 60 and 90. So it looks like on the quant section, I basically got 100% score. On verbal reasoning, my percentile score dropped. This is as I had feared before I started the practice exam. On the last practice exam, my score on the verbal section was in the 96th percentile. The significant drop today is telling me that I am not in a place where I will be able to consistently do well on this section, and as a result, I need to invest more practice in order to get to a point of consistency. My score on the data insight section is a significant improvement from where I was on the last practice exam. So I've gone from being in the 20th percentile to the 96th percentile. Some of this might be because I did better on accuracy today than I did last time, but I think a large part of the improvement is just from eliminating the penalty that you get for not submitting answers to all questions on a section of the GMAT. Paying some quick attention to the scaled scores here, my scaled scores on both verbal and data insight section are similar in number, so around 80 to 83 on a scale of 90. Overall, I'm actually surprised that my percentile score on the exam still shows up in the 99th percentile, even though my scaled score is 705. Once again, going back to my notes, we can see that the overall GMAT score is actually going to be on a scale of 205 to 805 in increments of 10. So if a score of 705 is already in the 99th percentile, that might be an indication that the GMAT Focus Edition actually offers percentile scores in many more slices between 99 and 100. On the older version of the GMAT, I remember that scores like 760, 770, 780, and 790 were all graded as being in the 99th percentile. That may or may not be the case for GMAT Focus Edition, I just do not know at this point. With that said, let's go into the next screen and look at how I did across the 3 sections on accuracy. We already know how I did on velocity from some of the numbers I shared earlier, but we might also have additional insights that we can find on the next screen. So this screen here just seems to show my overall test performance numbers. So it is just a regurgitation of what we were seeing on the previous screen. Let's look at how I did on the quant section. This screen is just showing my score as it stands on a scale of 60 through 90. Along with that, you can also see in gray the percentage of test takers whose scores are between the mentioned numerical ranges. Moving on, this is the part that I'm actually interested in. This is the part where you get to see all the questions that you attempted and how you did on those questions. First, let's focus on accuracy. So 21 questions on the quant section, I seem to have answered everything correctly, which is good. That is what I was gunning for given the number of days of prep I've already put in for this particular section. Second, on velocity, you can see that there are some questions that stand out in terms of the amount of time it took me to answer them. Particularly questions 1, 2 and 21 are the ones where I seem to have taken the longest amount of time to arrive at an answer. Overall, we already knew that I'd done well with velocity on this section because I was able to complete all the questions in time. I'm satisfied with this outcome because this shows that the preparation I have put in has worked. There are some additional charts on the screen, but I'm going to ignore those for the time being because the purpose of this video is not to understand how to use this information to inform your prep. So I will move quickly to the verbal reasoning performance metrics. Once again, as you can see, the first graph here just shows my overall score on a scale of 60 to 90. I'm more interested in the accuracy numbers, so I will just scroll down to this section. As we can see, there are 23 questions on this section, and overall, I seem to have answered 20 questions correctly. As I was mentioning earlier, I struggled a lot with questions 17 and 18, so I'm not surprised that I answered them incorrectly. I forget what happened with question number 23, but I might have answered it in a rush given that it's the last question on this section. I'm not going to try to diagnose the reasons for that at this point of time because I haven't invested even a single day into preparing for the verbal section yet. The only key message coming out of my score on the verbal section today and from my score on the same section from Practice Exam 1 is that I'm not in a place where my performance on this section is consistent. As a result, I will need to invest more time into preparing for this section. I definitely have the potential to do well, given that I scored in the 96th percentile the last time around, but potential does not always translate into outcome if you don't put in the work. With that said, let's now go into the data insight section. So once again, the first chart is just showing the overall score. We'll scroll down to the chart that is of interest to us. So here, once again, we have 20 questions, and overall, it looks like I answered 4 questions incorrectly. I'm actually amazed that I was able to score in the 96th percentile with 4 incorrect answers. However, at the same time, this accuracy is roughly in line with what I was expecting. If I go back to my notes from the last practice exam, you can see that I had not done well with accuracy on this section at that time either. I had answered 18 questions, of which I had gotten 13 questions right. That is 5 questions solved incorrectly. So overall, there is clearly scope for improving accuracy as well as velocity on the data insight section. Alright, so that is all for today. I'm going to stop at this point and take a break before returning to thinking about what these scores are telling me and how they should inform my GMAT preparation going forward. One critical mistake that I would want to avoid going forward as I transition my attention towards the data insight section is to ensure that my performance on the quant section does not drop. This will require me to continue practicing questions from the quant section on a regular basis till I have given the final GMAT exam. As I had mentioned in my last video, it looks like I am well within range of the velocity that is required to do well on the quant section of the GMAT. So starting tomorrow, I will shift my attention to preparing for the data insight section. Remember to hit like, subscribe and bell. If you have any questions, click on the Ask Me Anything link in the description and put some cheerful text in the comments while you are at it. You can even ask ChatGPT for some YouTube comment ideas if you can't think of something. I wish you the best for your prep, and I will see you in the next video.